You're watching Detroit on Deck. Here are your hosts, Dave Cesefske and Josh Clark.
What's going on, everybody? Another episode of Detroit on Deck. Dave Cesefske, Josh Clark, and a familiar face, Mr. DeWayne Scott. Mr. DeWayne Scott working in sports in Lima, Ohio. So my old stomping grounds, another familiar face. DeWayne's a big Ohio State guy, also from Columbus as well, right, DeWayne?
Yes, sir.
Now, DeWayne, we got to get into it, man. Listen, we're not trying to rub it in. Obviously, listen, Clarky's actually a North Carolina fan, and he does like Michigan football. But that was a game, guys. I mean, listen, I know it's frustrating for Ohio State, but in terms of down to the wire, a classic, just throw the records out type of game between Ohio State and Michigan. It was a classic. Didn't end the way that DeWayne might have wanted for Michigan. It was just a cherry on top. It was a bonus. We didn't expect that victory. DeWayne, I got to ask you to start off this whole thing because your AD came out today and said, hey, that's our coach. DeWayne, is that your coach? And should it be your coach at Ohio State?
Yeah, no. Absolutely not. I think that's just show face, what our AD said. But I think I mentioned to you couple days ago, like at Ohio State, like as a head coach at Ohio State, you have two things that you have to do is beat Michigan and win national titles. And Ryan Day has not done that since being at Ohio State, 1 for 4, I believe. And he can't win the big games. And obviously that's yielded to no national titles. So, I mean, it's kind of the writing's on the wall, I feel like, for Ryan Day. So even however this season ends, I think it's going to be the last days for Ryan Day as a head coach for Ohio State.
Go ahead, Clarky. Those are big words.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I personally think if he's not winning a national title this year, I do think mid-January, I do think he's out of Columbus and looking for work elsewhere. There's just no excuse for the type of showing that he, put on the field with, a much more talented team. It doesn't seem like he really had a game plan watching the game. So for me, I'm honestly surprised he's still employed, but like you said, the national championship kind of outweighs one singular game, in my opinion, even though it is Michigan. So if they're able to pull the national championship off, I do think he may be able to stay, but even then 1-4, it's not acceptable there in Columbus.
Here's my thing though, guys. Listen, I believe it's like 45-1 against everybody else, somewhere around there, right? Yep. And then 1-4 against Michigan. But that's still unacceptable, DeWayne. I mean, being in Ohio for the last couple of years there, this is the game. This is the one that's circled, right? Like you might win no other game, and if you beat Michigan, it'll buy you a little bit of time. But the way that he acted in postgame, I mean, there's so many videos out there. You've seen the memes. Sawyer's, I don't know, some student coach or something. He's holding it and he's saying, they tried to plant our flag, and he's just watching Ryan Day out in the distance like he just saw a ghost. That's not a leader. That's not a leader, in my opinion, the way he responded at the end of that game. I think if you're a player, DeWayne, I think you kind of lose a little bit of respect.
Yeah, I mean, there's several shots of him after the game and even the post game. It's a face of a man that has no more answers, I believe. So, I mean, like you said, you mentioned his record outside just Michigan and stuff overall. Like he's a winner. Like he's won a lot of games. I think he has one of the highest winning percentages of all head coaches in college football history. But at the same time, it's the standard that's set as a head coach of Ohio State. So, I mean, if you can't win against the Michigans and you can't win the big games, which has been his Achilles heel in the past, then it doesn't really matter who is leading the Buckeyes. And like you said, like his reactions and his comments post-game. As a player, I mean, you don't really want to see that at your head coach in a sense because it feels like even though it's a 10-2 team, it doesn't feel like a 10-2 team. So, I mean, it's just Yeah, I don't know. It's just there's definitely a lot of question marks regarding the head coaching position. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, as we go forward.
Clarky looks like a defeated man. Clearly an Ohio State Buckeye fan.
My thing with this roster, though, for Ohio State is, too, like, if you can't buy a winning team like you did this year with a $20 million roster in the NIL era, like to me, Ohio State doesn't have a prayer to beat Michigan moving forward because Michigan didn't do anything in the portal. They hardly have any NIL money
That's a good
anywhere
point.
outside of Portnoy, coming in and getting Underwood now. But if you can't even buy a winning team, like I think it's going to be some dark days in Columbus moving forward.
And that's the frustrating part, Josh, because there was a lot of players that came back, a lot of players that passed up on NFL money to come back and play this year, and the big transactions we made to bring some bigger names into the program this year. So when you have one of the most talented rosters in all college football, you can go down all the positions, it's kind of frustrating when you can't be a team that's clearly inferior to you. So I think that's more so the coaches. I'm not excluding Chip Kelly at all in this conversation either,
As you
because
shouldn't. He's a part of it.
Exactly. I think when it comes down to that Buckeye team, there's no excuse to put up 10 points that whole entire game, especially at home.
Now, if I told you that Davis Warren would go 9 of 16 for 62 yards, no touchdown passes, and if I also said to you that, okay, Khalil Mullins, he's going to get 32 attempts. However, he's going to average just over 3 yards an attempt. You're going to say, for sure, Josh, Michigan loses that game.
It's a 30-point loss.
So there I go back to you, DeWayne. Did you get the wrong quarterback in the portal? And if so, who should you have brought in?
I like Will Howard. I think most Ohio State fans in the program probably wanted Cam Ward as our quarterback this year, and you can see how he's doing for Miami. I mean, it just speaks for itself. But Will Howard's not a bad quarterback. You kind of know what you get from him, a dual threat, which is something that Ohio State was missing. And when we had Kyle McCord. So it just comes down to him making the right decisions. I mean, I feel like we both were watching that game, and we can see players wide open. I mean, you have Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka, who probably combined it for like 7 attempts. Like it's just unreal, the amount of talent around Will Howard. And it seemed like he couldn't utilize that. I don't know if it could be a combination of just him, play calling, coaching. But that said, it's kind of just like how Will Howard, in my opinion, is kind of similar to Brock Purdy in the 49ers. I mean, he's not the best type of quarterback talent, but when you have talent all around you, you just got to make the simple plays. Like, we don't need him to go out there and sling it for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Just make sure the offense stays consistent. And I think in certain games, especially the Michigan game, maybe in also a little bit in Oregon, when he made that costly mistake towards the end, you start to see some of the mistakes that Kansas State fans are warning most Ohio State fans about him.
I mean, you have to think too, Josh, because listen, there's like Will Rogers out there, Cam Ward, and obviously Will Howard. But Josh, my question to you now is, and DeWayne, I'm curious what your thoughts are too. The narrative out of Kansas State, though, was they didn't want him. Now, is that the case, or did he want to leave and they just they changed the narrative because, they were a little butthurt about him leaving? What's going on here? Is this a good quarterback that Kansas State lost, or is this somebody they said, hey, we're good with you leaving? Josh, what do you think?
Me personally, I think it was kind of the latter. I think they were good with him leaving, knowing what he has done for the program. I think he kind of reached his ceiling there, leading them to a Big 12 title a few years back. I didn't really think that with Howard at the helm or without Howard at the helm, Kansas State was going to win a title anyway. So I thought they were kind of jump starting their future and letting him walk and test the waters elsewhere.
What about you, DeWayne?
Yeah, I agree with Josh. I mean, Will Howard had a very successful career at Kansas State. He holds a lot of records there. But when you look at the possible, like when you're in the portal, you're looking at teams to join, who wouldn't want to join a team like Ohio State with all that talent around them? So I think, like Josh said, I think he served his time there at Kansas State. He did what he needed to do to help the program, and part of it was the program. Like, hey, let's try to move on from this quarterback. Let him get a better opportunity at Ohio State. So I think it's more so the latter, like Josh said.
And guys, listen. The topic obviously now has been, okay, how do we stop players from planting their flags on fields. Nobody said anything about Baker Mayfield years ago, right, when he did his thing. And that rivalry is, listen, guys, we love this rivalry. That's different too, right? That's a little bit different. There is no love lost between those teams. And at Oklahoma, when you do something like that, you put a stamp on your career there. He was the number 1 overall pick. Baker's turned his career around. He's no longer like, oh, he's a bust. He's a good player for the Bucs now. But we've seen this happen in years past, okay? It happened a couple years in Columbus. We were there. Me and Josh were at that game. They did the same exact type of deal. So why
15 feet from it. Like.
Right. So, guys, why all of a sudden is this a big deal? And if it is a big deal to you, DeWayne, don't you just beat them to stop it?
Listen, I think I mentioned this to you. Like, I think Michigan deserved to put their flag on that field. I mean, listen, like, I can't say I completely agree with planting your flag on other team's field, because I think that's kind of just like, that's not going to get a positive. Yeah, it's not going to. Well, that was also not going to be received by the other team well. You know, it's a pride thing. So I forget what other game I think was it Florida, that Florida game that they try to.
Was it Florida State, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And Norvell got involved.
Yeah, I mean, come on, like, people are bitter that they lost. Like, I don't welcome the violence. So I think the NCAA is definitely going to do something about that. But when you beat a team like that, and I think for exactly like Ohio State, specifically Ohio State, I think it was pretty much granted. But I don't approve of what the kind of actions and violence that you see from that kind of result.
Clarky, that was actually that's your team, Florida Gators.
Yeah.
So that's I misspoke. The Florida Gators are your team, but the same type of deal for Norvell. You had a terrible year. You don't like it, beat them. Now, I don't want people getting pepper sprayed, guys. I don't like that, right?
No, I'm 100% with you there, Dave, on that. Like, the violence at the end of the game was very, like, unnecessary on both teams' parts. I do, however, I'm a big competitive guy. Like, I love rivalry week, playing in college and high school myself, like, until injuries happened. So I'm all for the planting of the flag, but you have to do it in a tasteful manner. And I personally feel like Ohio State reacted the way they did, not because they lost. It's because they were embarrassed because of how big of a favorite they were. You know what I mean? Like, if you look at this game and the rivalry that it is, this was a historic game both ways in terms of Michigan winning a game where they have been the biggest underdog in this rivalry, and Ohio State losing the game as the biggest favorite in this rivalry's history. So that's, me personally, is what I'm thinking is going on there.
I mean, it was at 21.5 points at one point, right? Like, me and you, DeWayne, talked about this after. Is like we had no business winning that football game. No business winning that football game. You had, and honestly, guys, I could almost make an argument that Ohio State lost it before Michigan won the game because of the way that they called the game and the way that they played that. Thoughts, DeWayne?
So let me chime in right quick on that. So with you saying that, them losing the game other than Michigan winning the game, isn't that more so on Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator? I'm not calling a better game. It's Chip
Kelly and it's Ryan Day, man. And as far as I'm concerned, that play calling goes through Ryan Day's headset. He says yes or no. He's an offensive-minded coach, right? We're not talking about the defense that played remarkably for Ohio State. We're talking about the offense. Who is in charge of that offense? It's Chip Kelly and it's Ryan Day. It goes through the headset of Ryan Day. He gave up play calling duties. Did he not, DeWayne? That's
what he said. But as you mentioned, he has the final say in what the offense runs. But I will say this real quick. Yes, Ohio State was definitely embarrassed because quick, there's some players on that team are 0-4 against Michigan. Mm-hmm. The last time a class went 0-4 versus Michigan was like 1989. So that already speaks for itself. It doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. I mean, and honestly, guys, there's stats in here. Some of these don't matter, but some of them, it kind of scratches your head also. Like Alex Orji, okay, he touched the ball 3 times and he went for 32 yards. You know he ain't throwing the ball.
Right.
You know, like that's what I just confusing stats, right? You know, and Quinshon Judkins, who was another one of those big time players who you guys brought over there. They gave him the ball 12 times. He goes for 50 yards, okay? He had an average of 3.8. Trevion Henderson, 2.1. You know why? Because they kept going up the teeth of the defense. And that's something Ryan Day had a whole year to game plan about. And you know what? He's too, what's the word, guys? I mean, he's too in his own head. We're in his head, or stubborn maybe, because he can't change the play calls. I mean, you didn't go to the outsides. You just kept trying to go up the teeth of the defense, which was the only thing that Michigan did well all season long. I don't understand that.
Right. It's even when you even hear the broadcasters questioning that and telling them like, "Oh, Ohio State is in order for Ohio State to be successful, they got to excel on the outside, the perimeter."
Mm-hmm.
Why I'm confused that you keep on trying to force it up the middle, especially on an O line that's banged up. Like I think 3 or 4 of those guys are backups,
right.
Backups of backups. So it's very confusing. Or at least we'll question him, like, why do you think that you need to continue to run up the middle against a stout interior defense when your offensive line is already banged up? It's kind of laughable. It's just laughable.
I mean, listen, I do want to ask you some questions about some NFL questions as well, DeWayne, but we'll kind of wrap up the Ohio State-Michigan conversation. But I will say this, though. Our leading receiver, Marlon Klein, our backup tight end, 3 catches, 13 yards.
Isn't he our third string? Isn't O'Leary?
Yeah, he is. Yeah. O'Leary, 1 catch, 18 yards. I mean, however you want to identify our leading receiver, 3 catches, 13 yards. Like that's – and one of those catches he had, you guys know what I'm talking about when he just like juggled the ball.
It off the ground, basically.
Defender just takes – guys, Caleb Downs lost twice to Michigan this year.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like, dude left. He left to come to Ohio State from Alabama and lost to us again. Like, it's not even his fault, right? I'm just throwing that out there. Ohio State can go win a national championship, and DeWayne, this all doesn't matter. It probably doesn't matter, right? That's the only way.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to piggyback off that question right quick to DeWayne in terms of the national championship here. With the heavy hitters coming up now in the playoffs, Michigan is the best defense that Ohio State has seen all year. Mm-hmm. They're physical. Ohio State has not seen that until Michigan. Sure, they've won some games, but they haven't seen a physical defense like that. When you go up against the likes of a Georgia, a potential, you know what I mean, big SEC team like that, who I expect to kind of see them in the end. Honestly, I'm not sold on Oregon at all. What's your take on that right there in terms of running into possibly more physical defensive teams and the way that they kind of responded against a physical team in Michigan?
I'll say that another tough team that had a good defense that we faced was also Penn State. I think that was. I mean, you can say what you want about Penn State. They're probably the other most physical defense they probably face. But I honestly like the matchup against like Georgia. Georgia, their D line, they're always stout on their defensive front. But lately, they've been giving up some big plays down the field. So I really think Michigan, if you want to look just like from an outside perspective or just like looking down here, like you mentioned the playoffs coming up, I think Michigan is by far the toughest defense we faced. I think that will help us, especially if you're trying to like run the ball continuously like Ryan Day is trying to do this. Okay, maybe you can look at that film and say, okay, how can we tweak our running game that we can pull off these runs, right? But in terms of college football playoff, I think that Ohio State will probably play against lesser talent on defense. So I think it actually favors Ohio State, especially with the big targets we have on the outside.
Thanks for listening to Detroit on Deck. Be sure to like and subscribe to our page for more Detroit content.